Hello everyone, this is Hina and I welcome you all to session number 2 of Test Automation Engineer Certification. Let's have a look at our first module, which is Introduction and Objectives for Test Automation. In this module, we will be covering two topics. The first one is Purpose of Test Automation, which we'll be covering in today's session, and the second one is Success Factors in Test Automation. Okay, so let's have an overview of software testing activities. So when we think about software testing activities, there are different activities which can be either manually conducted, or we can also do that in an automated manner. In manual testing, tester takes over the role of an end user executing the software under test to verify its behavior. However, it is a very time-consuming activity, and thus if we can automate some of these testing activities, then that will definitely help. In automation testing, using certain tools, test scripts are developed and then executed without human testers' intervention to test the behavior of the system under test. So when we talk about test automation, we are talking about one or more of these tasks. The first one is using purpose-built software tools to control and set up test preconditions. So there can be many test automation tools which can help us in setting up the test environment and test data setup, or even the setup of the test automation solution, because testing, when we talk about test automation, it's much more than only test execution. So coming to the second point, yes, it is the test execution that we can use test scripts to execute the test on a system. Number 3, comparing actual outcomes to predicted outcomes. So when we are running the test automatically, then we can also use the execution and the tool which we are using for automation to compare the actual result with the expected result, and then mark the tests either fail or pass. Test automation helps executing test cases on different versions of the SUT and or environments. Let's have a look how. So for example, if we have a set of test cases, let's say we have 50 test cases, and we are using test automation to run those test cases on a system which is version 1.0. Then we have made some changes in that system and we got a new version 1.1. So what we can do, we can use the same set of test cases to run on the new version of that system as well. And similarly, we can do the same for a newer version, which is 1.2. So what we are doing, that we are not changing the test cases. We are using the same set of test cases, and we are just running our test cases on all the versions. Now over here, I hope that how it helps with running the test on different versions, that's clear. Now let's have a look at the environments. So for example, this entire system, all these different versions can be on one test environment. And then version 1.2 can be our final version, and then once it's signed off, we can move the same version to our UAT environment. And over here also we can use the same set of test cases to run on version 1.2 on UAT environment, and similarly in production as well. So this is how we can use the same test cases. Maybe we can make slight changes wherever needed, but yes, we can use the same set of test cases on different versions and on different environments. Just imagine if we have to do all this testing manually and how time consuming it would be. Okay, so when it comes to test automation, it involves a process of designing the testware. Now, before we proceed, let's have a look at what is testware. So testware is a set of materials, or you can say it's a kind of umbrella in which there are different activities, there can be different things which we can use for performing testing. Like for example, it can be test plan, it can be test cases. For automation testing, it can be test scripts, it can be test data, etc. So this is testware. So coming back to this topic, test automation involves a process of designing the testware, including software, documentation, test cases, test environments, and test data. Okay, so now we know what is testware. Now let's have a look at why this testware is necessary for testing activities. So which testing activities are we talking about? Implementing automated test cases. So when we have automated test cases, then of course we need some kind of testware in order to implement those test cases. It can be any tool, it can be any kind of framework, etc. Number 2, monitoring and controlling the execution of automated tests. So when we are executing our automation test, then we also need some mechanism for monitoring and controlling those tests so that we can compare that whether we have covered all the test cases, how many test cases were executed, how many were blocked, what were the results, etc. Number 3, providing wider function coverage. So when we talk about wider function coverage, we are mostly referring to the concept of regression testing. That, like for example, if we have made any change in a system, but that change has affected many other features which were already developed and tested, then of course we need to test everything again. And this is an area where automation testing is very, very useful. Test automation has different approaches for interacting with a system under test. So let's have a look at those approaches. The first one is testing through the public interfaces to classes, modules, or libraries of the system under test. And over here we are referring to API testing. So I hope that you are already aware with the concept of API testing. If not, then I will just give a brief overview. So API is application programming interface, and as the name says, that it acts as an interface between applications. So for example, if you are booking your flight online using a system, then what you do is that you enter your preferences, like what's the date you want to travel, and also the destination, etc. as well, and if you have any kind of budget, etc. So you are entering all the details you want the search results for. So after entering all the details, what you are doing is you are pressing the search button, and then what happens that you get all the search results based on the inputs you have given. So that's what API is. So an API is, what it's doing, that it's taking your request, and based on your request it's returning you a response. So this is what API testing is about, and there are many tools which can be used for API testing. Maybe you have heard of some of the tools like SOAP UI and Postman. So these are the most popular tools, but there are many others as well. Number 2, testing through the user interface of the system under test. For example, Gui testing or CLI testing. So Gui testing is graphical user interface. So when you have an interface, a user interface, and you use it for testing, so test automation is mostly used for that as well. Or it can also be used for CLI testing, which is the command line interface. So command line interface where you don't have a graphical user interface, and over there it's more of like a command prompt where commands are given to the computer program in forms of lines of text. And number 3 is testing through a service or a protocol. So this is where you are testing a network. You are testing a network layer, and you are using different services, protocols, IP configurations, etc. Now let's have a look at objectives of test automation. So what are the objectives of test automation? It includes improving the test efficiency. Of course, we are expecting that test automation improves the efficiency of a program. So if we are running a manual test on a system where there are lots of changes, lots of different versions, then it's difficult to handle using manual testing. And this is where this is one of the objectives, that test automation improves the test efficiency of the entire testing process. Number 2, providing wider function coverage. So test automation, the second objective of test automation is that we can cover more testing areas. So like we can cover more areas in testing as compared to manual testing. Again, I will give the example of regression test. Number 3, reducing the total test cost. So one of the important objective of test automation is that the total test cost of, let's say, a system under test it should be reduced as compared to manual testing. Number 4, performing tests that manual testers cannot. Okay, so there are lots of tests which we can't perform manually. Let's give you an example of performance test. So performance test, let's say that we have to run a scenario where there are 1,000 simultaneous users and they have to use the system at the same time. And now over here, we can't replicate this scenario manually. So there are few tests where we definitely need to use automation test tools. Number 5, shortening the test execution period. So if we are using any automation tool as compared to manual testing, definitely the execution time will be quicker. It will be faster than manual testing. Number 6, increasing the test frequency or reducing the time required for test cycles. So when we have automation test, we can use the same test multiple times, as we just saw that on different versions, on different test environments, and we can run it multiple times. We can even schedule it for overnight execution as well. Of course, we can't do all that manually. So this was the objectives of test automation. Let's have a quick look at advantages of test automation. So when it comes to advantages, the first one is more tests can be run per build. So if we are having a build, a specific version of the system, then in a given set of time, we can run more automation tests as compared to the manual test. Number 2, the possibility to create tests that cannot be done manually. So again, as we just discussed the example of performance test, so those kind of tests come over here. Or if we have any kind of security testing, there are many automated tools which we can use for security testing. There can be many scenarios which we might not be able to execute manually. So those kind of tests, it's good that we use any kind of test automation for that. Number 3, tests can be more complex. Okay, so if there are any tests which are more complex and which are there's a requirement to run those tests more frequently, then test automation is very, very helpful. Over here, let's take an example of an online shopping site. So we are doing shopping on an online site, and there is an offer that if we are shopping over £50, then shipping will be free. So what is this, that if we are running this kind of if we are testing this scenario manually, then every time when we calculate the total of the shipping, we have to manually make a decision that whether the shipping should be free over here or not, and then we have to test it for each and every scenario. While if we just automate this test once and specify that if the total of shopping is more than 50, then it will be free shipping, otherwise the shipping charges will be included. So these kind of scenarios are complex to test manually, but easier to test using test automation. Okay, number 4, test run faster. So yeah, that's obvious that if in a given time we are running manual test and automation test, and the automation test will be quicker. Yes, writing the automation test first time, that's time consuming because it's just like you are defining all the test data, test steps, etc. But when it comes to executing it again and again, then definitely it's faster than manual test. Number 5, tests are less subject to operator error. So this over here, by operator, we are referring to a human. So if we are running the same test 10 times, then it's most probable that maybe 8 times we have given all the right inputs, and maybe 2 times we have given some incorrect inputs, and there can be any kind of error because of the inputs which we have given, because there can be mistakes. But if we are using automation testing, then every time, though even if we run those tests 10 times, 100 times, 1000 times, there is less chances of any kind of human error. Number 6, more effective and efficient use of testing resources. So we know that manual testing is a time-consuming activity, and if there is a manual tester who is running the same test again and again, as compared to we have test automation where the same test can run faster, then what we are doing is that we are freeing up that manual tester, and that manual tester can actually use his or her time more efficiently in some other testing activity. So that's what we mean by the more effective and efficient use of testing resource. Number 7 is quicker feedback regarding software quality. As test automation is a faster activity, we can run it faster as compared to manual testing. It also means that we are getting a quicker feedback, that how many tests have been covered, how many were passed, failed, etc. So we are getting a quicker feedback. Number 8, improved system reliability, for example, repeatability, consistency. So this is quite related to number 5, that if we are using the same tests again and again and we have automated that, then we know that we will be getting more reliable result, more accurate result. So this is why test automation in this aspect is better than manual testing. And the last one is improved consistency of tests. So when we are talking about automation frameworks, these frameworks make it possible to maintain the consistency of testing and hence make the test more reusable. So these were the advantages. Now let's have a look at the disadvantages of test automation. The first one is additional costs are involved. So as compared to manual testing, yes, test automation have lots of advantages, but of course we are using many different tools for automation. many different frameworks, setting up the architecture, test data, test environment, all these things, it involves additional costs. Related to that, then the second point, initial investment to set up TAS, which is test automation solution. So if we are setting up a framework, then of course we need some kind of infrastructure for that. We need an environment. We need many specific things in order to set up that solution for test automation, and it requires initial investment. Number 3, it requires additional technologies. So in manual testing, what we are doing is that we are acting as an end user and we are using the system and assessing the quality of the system. But if we are automating testing, then of course we need a lot of additional technologies. If we need to develop our test scripts, then of course we are developing it using a programming language. We need like C#, Java, etc. If we are using a framework, then we need a test framework, etc. So there are lots of technologies which are required for test automation. Number 4, the team needs to have development and automation skills. So a manual tester might not know programming, might not know automation testing. So in order to perform, either that person needs to upgrade his or her skills and needs to learn programming, needs to learn automation, or we need to hire someone with those skills. Number 5, ongoing TAS maintenance requirement. Okay, so test automation solution. Automation has lots of benefits, but one of the things which needs to be done consistently is maintaining those tests, because remember that we have ongoing changes as well in the system. So whenever we have any change, then we need to go back and make that change in the script as well, so that it's passed when we run it again. And similarly, if there is any kind of issue in our test script, for some reason if they are failing, then we need someone who is spending some time on maintaining that solution. So that's one of the disadvantages, because this is a time-consuming activity as well. Number 6, it can distract from testing objectives, for example, focusing on automating test cases at the expense of executing tests. All right, so yes, automation testing can be very tempting and everyone wants to do automation testing. But let's say that how about if we are forgetting the main objective of testing? Main objective of testing is testing the system for its and to verify its behavior. But let's say instead of doing that testing, we are spending the same time in automating the test cases, in writing the test scripts and ignoring the test execution, then definitely that's not helpful at all, because this is distracting us from the main objective of testing. And if this is the case, then definitely manual testing would be better in that scenario. Number 7, tests can become more complex. Okay, so there can be few scenarios where automated testing can be more complex, and maybe there is one complex feature which is easier to test manually rather than automating it, and maybe that test is not very frequently used as well. So in that case, it's not beneficial to spend a lot of time in order to automate those kind of tests. Number 8, additional errors may be introduced by automation. So there can be many issues, like for example, maybe a locator is changed, an element is no more there, or there can be other issues in the tool which you are using, so which can add on to the different errors, and then you have to spend time in order to understand those errors and then get those fixed and then run your automated test. So this is also like one of the disadvantage of test automation. So now let's have a look at limitations of test automation. The first one is not all manual tests can be automated. So by now we know that we can't automate all the manual tests, or maybe I think the right term to be used over here would be that it's not worth to automate all the manual tests. So this is also a key role to identify that which test should be automated and which should be executed manually. Okay, so the second one is automation can only check machine interpretable result. Okay, so when we are testing anything manually, then often it happens that we are testing something, and during testing then based on the output we have got, we can assess and we can come up with another scenario, and maybe we can then test those scenarios as well as coming to our mind based on the outputs we are getting. But this is something which we can't do in automation. It can, whatever you specify to automation script, it will only interpret the result in that way. So it can never analyze the results. So that's one of the limitation of test automation. Then the third one is the automation can only check actual results that can be verified by an automated test oracle. Okay, so test oracle is a mechanism to determine whether a test has passed or failed. And of course, how you can get an idea of that using test automation. Of course, you have to specify a mechanism that, okay, if this happens, then it's passed or it's failed. And maybe in some cases it might not work well, because it will just check the results based on what you have told the automation tool to do. It can't do anything beyond that, and this can be a challenging task as well. And the last one is it's not a replacement for exploratory testing. When it comes to exploratory testing, then definitely automation is not useful at all, because exploratory testing is that you are learning, you are getting to know the system as you are going through the system. So you're just navigating the system and you are exploring it, as the name says, and this is where a human can do a better job than automation test. And in this case, the experience of the tester also comes it's also very beneficial, because an experienced tester would know that which areas they have to navigate in detail, which are looking good, and they can just go through overview where they have to dig deep down. So this is where automation testing does have its limitation. Okay, so with that, we have come to end of today's session. So I hope you have found this session useful. If you have any question, then please leave it either in the comments box or you can ask me in the group. Any one of you who are not aware of our group, then I will leave the details in the description as well, so you can have a look and you can join our Facebook group. Then I will see you soon in the next video, and till then, take care.